Welcome to The Whole View. I'm Stacy Toth of Real Everything, and I'm here each week to dive deeper into how we can find happiness and health inside and out through self-love, body positivity, and discovering new ways to be our best selves. Before we get started, a reminder that this podcast is for general educational purposes and is not intended to diagnose, advise, or treat any physical or mental illness. And while Dr. Hayley is a clinical psychologist, she's not yours. So we always recommend you see a licensed health professional accordingly. That said, I do want to welcome you, Dr. Hayley Watson, to the show, a clinical psychologist with a PhD in school bullying interventions and over 20 years of experience creating and delivering mental health programs for youth educators and parents. She's also an author and the founder and CEO of Open Parachute, a K-12 curriculum program supporting the mental health of students, teachers, and parents. And Dr. Watson's work spans across the US, Canada, the UK, and Australia. Super cool. Basically all the English-speaking places. And you can find Dr. Watson on LinkedIn and her website, openparachuteschools.com. We'll put links in the show notes for you. You can also see her personal story of trauma that led to her current passion for the work that she does by watching her TEDx talk. And we'll also get all kinds of resources for you in the show notes. But maybe you could tell listeners a little more about yourself and what brought you to this work and where they can find you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. So yeah, as you mentioned, I am a clinical psychologist. I think like most of us that get into sort of helping young people, I struggled when I was young and was one of those kids that hit it really well. And I think that's the thing that we forget a lot of the time in our world. We think that when someone's struggling with their mental health, it's going to be really obvious. They're going to be acting out or they're going to be doing things that we can tell. And that's not always the case. And so I didn't really realize the impact of some of the things that I went through until I was an adult. And then when I finally got into therapy and started figuring things out, it was just absolutely night and day. My life transformed. And so what I'm really passionate about is providing young people with the skill set to be able to do some of that self-reflection, to be able to understand, oh, this hard thing happened and that's how it's impacting me. And this is how I might help myself with it. Or this is how to resolve things with people in my life, or just those really important mental health skills that we don't get taught anywhere, unfortunately, in our culture. And so that's my passion, is to really make that accessible to every single child and teenager, not just the ones that can afford therapy or that have access to the things that not everyone has access to. So that's what kind of brought me here.
I love that you're doing this work so much. And I don't know if it's just the kind of bubble that I'm in because I myself am passionate about this and have become more educated on it. But I do see even in like my children's peers or neighbors or different kinds of things that people are starting to become more aware of things that at least my generation, we did not talk about feelings. We pushed things down, like different kinds of things like that, that really created more problems. Like, I don't know what the cycle was generations before that, but whatever it is. And I think in the time that we're in right now, obviously, listeners, if you're listening to this back later, hopefully you know this time period, but it's relevant that Simone Biles is currently sharing her resiliency with mental health and how important it was for her physical health, for her to get her mental health appropriate. There's a Netflix documentary kind of outlaying the traumas that she experienced and how it was causing physical effects to her and putting her in danger. And we've talked before on the show about ACE traumas, and that really aligns for me, right? And this idea of if we don't manage these things when we're younger, if we don't learn how to express our needs and talk about our feelings and seek help when we need it, then we push these things into our bodies that cause health outcomes that are negative. And so it is a health and wellness show. I'm not going to go into the details of all of those things, but listeners, we'll put a link in the show notes for you of that prayer show and other things because it is so relevant to our health, not just the well-being of our mental health, but our actual physical health to do some of these things.
Absolutely. And everything is linked. All of our systems are linked. And when something is buried, as you said, when we push something down, absolutely comes out physically in disease. It also comes out in the decisions that we make. Everything is a flow-on effect from the next. So if something hard has happened in my life and I'm not addressing it, I might avoid certain things because they trigger that memory. And then all of a sudden I'm limiting myself. And then all of a sudden my options become limited. And then all of a sudden my access to things become limited because I haven't taken some of those choices. And then there's this huge flow-on effect. And I love that you mentioned Simone Biles in the documentary, because that is actually exactly the modality that we use in our school programs. Is we need to hear from people. This is the only way that things change, because it's all well and good for a psychologist to say something or you hear something theoretical. But especially for young people, it needs to be relevant. They need to hear someone their own age saying, hey, I went through this and this is what I felt and this is what I thought. And it's okay to feel and think those things. And here are some of the skills I used. So that's one of the exciting things about the work that I've done across the world, is I've been able to travel around and film little mini documentary stories of young people sharing their experiences. And this is the way to cut through. We have to show this. We have to make this accessible to young people. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of adults saying, this is what you should do. And it's really hard. It's so hard and challenging to break out when something's happening. You want to fit in with your peers. You want to do things the right way. There's so much pressure in social media and all of those kinds of things, that for a young person to really be able to look at themselves and look at the interconnectedness of things and say, yeah, I am hurting about that, or that wasn't okay, what that friend did to me. That takes a huge amount of courage. And so we have to be showing role models. This is what other people are doing, and it's okay to do that. And it's celebrated to do that. Because right now we still live in a world where it is celebrated to keep things in and to be quote unquote strong, which basically just means emotionally cut off, not show anything. And that's tricky. That's a big thing that we're starting to change, and it really just needs to keep going in that momentum.
I think the surprising thing for me with my teenagers and social media was I had this perception that it was going to be like it is on TV or movies, where it's like the actual people that they go to school with bullying or commenting or what this
Mm-hmm.
seeking validation from those people is what they would be experiencing. But in my personal experience with all four of my teenagers, it's
Mm-hmm.
much more about the outside influence of people they don't know, both
Yes.
who they play video games with or who are on TikTok. So maybe we can talk a little bit about what are our youth experiencing in those places where those of us who were raised without TikTok and social media
Mm-hmm.
present in the classroom and those kinds of things. Fortunately for me, there was like AOL and then Facebook when I was in college, but all of the things that I was thinking and doing are not documented anywhere, right? But for my kids, it's very different. And
Yeah.
so I think maybe just helping us understand from a mindset perspective, what is that like for kids these days?
Absolutely. And I think it's important to qualify this with the understanding that we can't actually know what it's like. So I'll absolutely share my thoughts around this and what the research is showing and all those things. But it's so important for us as adults to really recognize this is a whole new world. And so I'm sure that we're going to find things out 20 years down the road where we go, oh, that's another layer of that. And so it's really important for us to listen to young people and ask them, what is it like for you? So if you have kids, that's such a valuable question. What's happening for you? What's this like? But yeah, let's give it a little bit of context. So when you think of the developing mind, the adolescent brain, it is primed to fit in. Like that is a developmental and an important aspect of what's happening in the brain, because as young people, we need to find out, when we're a teenager, we need to find out what is going to be my social group, my peer group going forward, because our parents are not going to be with us. And that becomes a survival instinct. So if I don't find an in group, I'm on the out. And when you think about the history of evolution, if we're on the out group back when our brains were being created a long time ago, which our brain chemistry hasn't changed in a very long time, that would mean that we're not going to survive. So that's how vital it is to be part of a group. So I think that's a really important thing to understand, because it's easy for us to go, well, why don't you just don't have a social media account to put your phone down? What's going on? So it's this really in defense mechanism for survival. So that's the fitting in part. Now, in our day, of course, fitting in just meant, like you said, the kids at school or the kids down the street, and you could get away from it. You could go home and you did fit in your family and you did have that support, hopefully, in your family. But now there's this layer, and it's really hard for the brain, even when we have conversations with young people saying what isn't real, the story that is being shown isn't real. It is really hard for the brain when it sees an image to be able to understand that. So even lots of kids are really switched on to this and they get it and they say, yeah, I know it's airbrushed and I know that's not the real life, but there's a part of their brain subconsciously that really does believe that's real, because that's just what our brain does. It sees images and it interprets those images. So we have this survival instinct saying we have to fit in. Then we have all of this imagery and all of this story of a life that's frankly better than ours, because it's always going to be better than ours on social media. People look better. People are doing cooler things. People have more friends, all of that kind of stuff. And so then our brain goes into overdrive. Our anxious brain, which we all have levels of anxiety, goes into, well, how do I fix this? How do I change so that I can get into the in-group a little bit more? And that's when the problem starts, because then we start locating the issue in ourselves when actually the issue is outside of ourselves. The issue is the system that we're in and what it's showing us. But as young people, we start thinking, this is my fault. So do I need to change the way I look? Do I need to change what I'm doing? Do I need to change my body? Do I need to change? What are all the things I need to change? And that's why it's so challenging.
I think it's also interesting how their sense of self is formed at this time. Like
Mhm.
I love the perspective of the survival instinct. That's something that Lisa D'Amour talked about in her book and on
Mhm.
social and podcasts. That was really impactful for me when I was first entering the teenagers for my kids, in terms of like trying to understand why just one day your kids are no
Mhm.
longer wanting to spend time with you or hold your hand or whatever, right? There's a thing in their brain that clicks that's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I'm not going to have my parents forever. I
Yeah.
need to learn to be independent. And where
Mhm.
we as adults know 5 years is a very long time to transition into
Yeah.
adulthood, like that mechanism is a survival instinct. Like, I think you
Mhm.
explained that in a super helpful way.
Mhm.
The other thing that I notice with my kids is they're trying to find who they are. And I think part of
Mhm.
that is, yes, this peer group fitting in, but
Mhm.
also in order to find your right peer group, you need to know who you are, what your interests are. And my
Yes.
kids, perhaps because we have these kinds of discussions at the dinner table or whatever, like they're curious about things
Mhm.
and they're asking me for answers. But if they weren't asking me for answers, then they would only be getting the information
Yeah.
inputs from what they're consuming, either online or from their friends or whatever. And
Mhm.
some things that they bring home or talk about, I'm like, what? Where did you hear that? That is absolute crazy talk. Like, don't say that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting as we talk about empowering youth and
Mhm.
empowering educators. One of the things that maybe we could also talk about is how we can help parents prepare to
Mhm.
open up those conversations in a way that allows children to want to answer when you say, how are things for you? Right. Because I have one child
Yeah.
who will just grunt at me and won't give me any sort of responses back.
Yeah.
And then I have another child that if I ask that question, I'll be sitting on the sofa for 30 minutes and at least one of us will be in tears. Right. So it's very different in terms of who the person is. But I think
Mhm.
in how we as parents can, as you said, listen, maybe you could talk
Mhm.
about some of those active listening skills and what that actually looks like.
Definitely. And I think what you said is just so important, because it is about the dialogue that is the protection that we can create. Because that's the thing. We live in a world where we can't protect kids from all of the things they're exposed to. They are exposed to literally everything. And I think that's an important thing as a parent to recognize. Assume your child has been exposed to way more things than you even know about, because we can't police that. We can't protect that. The only thing we can do is provide them with a skill set to be able to recognize, is this okay for me or is this not okay for me? Do I like this? Do I not like this? Like you said, that's a journey and that's actually a skill set. And so that's why that skill set is so important to be teaching. And so as parents, in order to start that dialogue, firstly, one really great tip is share yourself, be vulnerable with your kids. So, and there's a very big difference between dumping and being vulnerable. And I think that's an important distinction. So we don't want to come in and go, I had the worst day ever and rant about it or have an unprocessed emotional outburst. But if something as hard has happened and we've sat with it and we've recognized how it's impacting us, then share that. Hey, I had this interaction at work today and it made me feel anxious. And it actually brought up some feelings for me of when I was a kid and people were not that nice to me. And so I actually lashed out at this person, or ended up internalizing it and feeling bad about myself. And I did those things because I had this reaction in my brain, and I can see that and I can have compassion for myself about that. And I'm not perfect, but hey, I'm recognizing it, I'm working on it. And then what I did after that is take a few deep breaths and realize it wasn't about me. Give them the play by play because that's the skill set that they need. And as a parent, you probably have more of that skill set than you realize. And that's the thing I always reinforce when working with educators or parents. This stuff, because you're a human and we have to figure this stuff out. There's just this layer of shame around it where we think that's not okay to have these vulnerable moments. It's not okay to have a reaction that's not great or not kind or whatever it is. We think it's not okay to be imperfect. But all of us have the skill set to be able to recognize when we're messing up and why we're messing up. If we stop and think about it and go, okay, right, I'm a bit stressed. That's why I snapped or whatever it is. And it's like we need to lift the curtain on that process. And when we do that, all of a sudden it's not so scary for our kids to also say, oh yeah, this is what happened and this is how I reacted. And that's the dialogue that you want. So that self-reflection doesn't become self-critical, doesn't become this place where we're ashamed, because it's naturally what we feel. As soon as we look at a pattern, we go, oh, that's so embarrassing. I'm so embarrassed I did that, or I don't like that I did that. But that's what we want to do. So you want to start that dialogue with your kids of just talking about yourself, talking about other people. Even we can point things out. I wonder why that your friend was mean to you. Do you think maybe they were stressed about something or something that's going on for them at home? Like, just again, lifting the curtain of, we all act in ways based on what we're thinking and feeling, which usually has nothing to do with the current situation and everything to do with past situations that we're remembering and we think are still real. And all of us still act like we're 5 or 6 or whatever it is when we're in those moments of stress, because our brain just goes back. Again, it's a survival instinct. This is something I recognize. I recognize this feeling. It's scary. Something scary, bad happened when I was younger about this. So now I'm just shut off from it. And so it's just helping that dialogue that all of that stuff's okay. All of that crazy stuff that goes on in our head, we're all totally nuts. And that's okay. And when you normalize that, again, of course, there'll be some kids that don't want to talk about it and that do shut down. And that's also okay. And I think that's an important thing with active listening. All we can do is create the environment. So create a situation with your child where you are one-on-one. A lot of the time, kids that don't like to talk about things, driving in a car is a really great place because they don't have to look at you. Or you're doing something together, do an activity with them. So just have situations where you're setting the stage, and then you can't control whether they're going to share or not, but you can keep opening the door for them. It's a little bit like, so I have a 4-month-old and I've been learning about baby sleep. And the thing they keep saying is, all you can do is set up set up the situation, shut up, make the room dark, soothe their little bodies. But then you can't control if they're going to go to sleep or stay asleep. It's the same thing with this. Control what you can control. Create the environment, have the dinners, whatever it is that is a space where you're inviting your child to participate. And then it's okay if they don't. And one day they'll say something and maybe they'll only say 3 words, but amazing. You just take that, you go with it, and you don't need to push them, but you just keep setting the stage, opening the door. And don't worry if your child is open or not open. It doesn't matter. They're still learning from you. They're still picking it up and they're going at the pace that works for them. And that's perfectly fine.
I love what you said about that too, is that it releases a little bit of our own parenting shame or guilt about what we should
Yes.
be doing differently,
Hmm.
or am I not good enough that this
Yes.
child isn't doing whatever? Because
Hmm.
if you're setting the stage and allowing someone to come at their own pace, it
Yeah,
would be expected that there's gonna be variables. Like, I have one
exactly.
child where I can say the exact same thing in the same situation and get
Yeah.
2 very different results. Like, that's
Yes,
not me as a parent, that is
absolutely.
those individual children, and I think
Mhm.
one of the magical things about being the parent of an older child, and you have a 4-month-old, you have so much to look forward to,
I know.
is learning their personalities and getting
Yeah.
to know them, right? Like, there's this
Yes.
phase that happens sometime between kindergarten and high school where you start enjoying spending time with your children.
Mhm.
I don't want to say as a friend because we're always parents, right? We don't need to push, we don't need to like do all of these different kinds of things because our
Mhm.
children will on their own show us who they are. And I think that's another thing that has been a lesson for me to learn as a parent in
Mhm.
terms of like I a lot of us like have these unfulfilled needs that we had as children that we think, "Oh, I was going to be a great
Yeah.
softball player. I'm going to put my kids
Mhm.
in softball and they're going to do
Mhm.
great." And if your kid doesn't like softball or it feels overwhelming or anxious for them,
Yeah.
there's a whole lot wrapped up in that. And
Mhm.
where we've had these open conversations and these open places for them to be able to come and say, actually, I'm stressed about whatever. That feels more powerful to me as a parent that my child would entrust me with that. Or I've had circumstances before where my children actually asked us to stop writing books because it was stressing them out, the cadence of having to do things or whatever. And we had a family meeting one night and the kids were like,
Mhm.
"Can we not do another book?" And I was like, "Wow, I'm so proud of you for like
Yeah.
expressing that and
Mhm.
sharing in a roundabout way the impact that it was having on you." And
Mhm.
part of what I feel like is important as a parent is if we are doing active listening to
Yeah.
actually take that feedback and
Mhm.
have value to it, right? Just because our children doesn't mean that they're not their own people, and
Mhm.
expressing their needs and being vulnerable and doing those sort of things are so big that
Mhm.
for me, it feels like those are the big, powerful moments where
Yes.
I want to create a core memory of like, you are heard. I hear
Yes.
you. Right.
Yes.
Like, and so
Yes.
how do we, maybe you can share more
Mhm.
about, and this is also for educators, right? Because children
Oh,
can
yeah.
also open
Absolutely.
up to other kinds of caregivers. So, how
Mhm.
do we, when we have those moments for children, when they do share something that maybe isn't what we want to hear or expect,
Mhm.
but they do have that vulnerability themselves,
Yeah.
how do you recommend managing that?
Yeah. Great question. And I think you alluded to this already, and I love what you were saying about just taking that pressure off of needing to be perfect. And I think that's the first step because it's really important to recognize our own response and our own mental health in those moments. If a child or a teenager throws something at us that we're not expecting, we are going to have our own reaction, and that's okay. So the first step is to take a breath and to remember it's okay. I haven't messed up here. I'm not a bad parent. This isn't a reflection on something I've done wrong. And importantly, if your first reaction is not that, and you snap or you say something that's inappropriate or rude, or you shut your kid down, or any of those things, that is so normal and that's okay. Everything can be repaired. So whenever you notice, oh, right, they just shared something vulnerable, either it's in the moment or it's later and you go, oof, maybe I need to catch that. Then you go back to your child and you start then. And that's perfectly fine. So you always can start whenever you notice. So as soon as you notice, the first thing is thanking them for sharing with you. That's really important. I'm so proud of you. I'm really grateful that you said this and acknowledging the courage it took. So really saying that that was I think that was a hard thing for you to do. That must have been a hard thing for you to do. I'm really proud of you because it is really hard for a young person. There's a power differential. Their parent or their educator or anyone that's older than them naturally has more power than them in that dynamic. So that is a huge thing for them to do. So you name it and you say, I'm really grateful to you for saying that. And then a really simple follow on is tell me more about that. I'd love to hear more about your thoughts around this. And really just giving them a space to express and then listening, not jumping in, not responding, saying, I really want to hear what you're saying about this. And then this is the hardest part because it's really natural for us. And especially the closer we are to kids, the harder this is. So it's way easier when I'm working with a psychologist, for example, than when I'm working with my partner, Tom, or my 4-month-old, who's only 4 months. He still can get those reactions. So it's a lot harder because we have a personal reaction. We want to go, but I didn't say that, or that's not what I meant. They're saying, hey, when you did, this is how I feel, or when we're writing this book, this is how I feel. It's easy to go, but that you shouldn't feel like that, or whatever your intention is. That's okay. Remembering their perspective is might be completely different from your perspective, or what you intended, or what the situation looks like to you. So you're just giving them space, hearing what they have to say, asking questions about it. Tell me more about that. I really want to hear about what you're saying. And then this is a really cool part of this. You don't have to fix it for them. And I think this is so important for us all to hear. You don't have to be the one that comes in and says, okay, I'm going to change this so you don't feel like that anymore. Their feelings are valid, and it's okay that they feel that way. There's nothing wrong with feelings. We can't control feelings. What's important is they learn how to take care of those feelings. So the best thing you can do in those situations is ask them, what do you think would be the best way to resolve this? What are some thoughts and ideas you have? And then empower them. And sometimes it's that they're asking you to do something. And that's okay, right? They're asking you to stop doing something. That's a skill then. They're asking is the skill. But sometimes it's, well, maybe I need a few more boundaries around this. Maybe this can keep going, but I need to do it a bit differently. Or maybe it's a conversation that they need to have with a friend because that's the thing that's hard, or whatever it is, helping empower them to take some sort of action. Even if you're the one that needs to change, maybe their action is they need to remind you every time that you mess up, because if the kid's asking you to change, you're definitely going to mess that up, because we're not perfect. We're not human. So there's always a part that they can play. And that's important because what we want them to learn is that A, they're heard, they're valued, their opinion matters, their feelings are valid, but B, they have the power to help themselves with those feelings. Because we do two things. We either shut our feelings down, which is what we've talked about a lot. The other thing that we do is externalize our feelings and make our feelings other people's problems. And so we also don't want to encourage kids to do that. So they just come to you and say, I'm sad about this. And then you go, okay, let me make it all better for you. You want to encourage them to say, I hear you. Now, what are we going to do about it together? And maybe they need a lot of help at first. Maybe you need to do it with them a lot of times. But eventually, they're learning that skill of, how can I navigate these situations on my own when my parent isn't here? And so that's the thing to remember, is just listen, hear them, and then help them do anything. And the thing is, the part that they play can be so small. It doesn't matter how tiny the step is they're taking. If they're taking a step, they will start to learn to have agency. They will know, oh, I took that step, and then validate it. Even if it's the tiniest thing ever, say, that is so amazing that you were able to take a breath and you waited a half a second before you screamed, or whatever it is. Anything they do that's a little bit different, validate that. And then they start to learn, oh, I am the one I have power here. I can do things to help myself. And that is a massively transferable skill.
It's interesting when you're talking about the praising at the end. I was like, it's like positive reinforcement for training your dog.
Exactly.
But it really is. It's the same way that
Yeah.
kind of there was a renaissance when my children were toddlers in understanding that spanking and timeout wasn't really getting the
Yeah.
solutions for
Yeah.
people. It was like asking them, what do you need in this moment? Right? Like when your child
Yeah.
is having a temper tantrum in the grocery store,
Yeah.
I definitely walked away from a child more than once who was like, having a fit because of whatever.
Yeah.
Looking back on it now, I would definitely approach things in a different way. It was interesting. My 17-year-old likes to walk to the park and go on the swings in the middle of the day here. And
Mhm.
oftentimes there are younger children at the playground, and they were sitting on the swings, and a child came up and the child wanted to be on the swings, and the mom was explaining to the child it wasn't their turn. And the
Mhm.
child went into a meltdown and was like
Right.
in a temper tantrum. And so my child was talking to me about it from the perspective of like, I didn't know if I should just like get off the swing and give her the swing, because then she would have had a positive result from a behavior that wasn't great, which I was like,
Oh, I love
yes.
it. I'm
Um,
so on it.
and at the same time, the mom could not handle it. Like the mom was
Yeah.
definitely not a place where she was feeling patient and in a
Mm.
state of mind to process what was happening. And so
Mhm.
the mom, what was explained to me is that the mom was yelling at the daughter for 5 to 10 minutes about
No.
this is not how we behave and blah, 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 like
Mhm.
in this, that sort of way. And then after about 10 minutes, at this point, my child had gotten off the swing. It was like trying to give them space, right? Like, if you need the swing, it's here. But at
Yeah.
this point, both the mom and the daughter at this point were like in tears. And the mom
Yeah.
said, you know what? I think we just need a hug. And they each took a hug and they each took a deep breath.
Mm.
And then what was described to me again, I wasn't there, is that the mom said, what do you need right now? And then the daughter was like,
Mm.
I'm okay. I just needed a hug. And it was
Oh,
like the life
beautiful.
lesson of what you're talking about, but
Mhm.
in a younger version that
Yes.
my teenager was then able to apply
Love it.
their life, right? And I
Yeah.
think oftentimes I hear from people, an older generation, let's say my children's grandparents, who cannot
Mhm.
understand the idea of like, well, in my day, validating feelings wasn't a thing. And I'm like, yeah,
Mhm.
but also I didn't talk about my feelings and I have autoimmune disorders and all kinds of problems from that, right? Like,
Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
it's definitely something that we can continue to work on at all ages. And I love that
Mhm.
you are talking about nobody is perfect. I think the hardest thing for me to do,
Mhm.
and I'm probably not alone in this, is realizing that when a child brought something to me and said something that I wasn't expecting or wasn't prepared for in that moment, and
Mhm.
I didn't react the way that I wish that I
Mhm.
did,
Mhm.
going back and saying that is so
Yes.
hard. I think I've been conditioned, and we probably all have, to
Mhm.
believe that telling a child that I was wrong in any sort of way
Mhm.
shifts the power dynamic and
Mm.
that's not appropriate, right? Like this whole
Mhm.
mindset.
Mhm.
And once I learned the power,
Yes.
both for myself and for my child, and going to them and saying, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening earlier. I was distracted.
Mhm.
And then I didn't respond the way that I wanted. Can we have that conversation again? Because I,
Mhm.
I want to do better. Or if I was reactive and instead of saying, I'm listening, how can I help you? Blah, blah, blah. I was
Mhm.
said something to the effect of, well, that's not what I meant. Or you shouldn't
Mhm.
feel that way, right? Like defensive
Yeah.
type statements,
Yeah.
and being able to go to them and saying, I I'm sorry, that's not how I meant to do that. Let's do it again. Like it's
Yeah.
incredible. I you would think, for people who haven't experienced this yet, because my husband has a hard time with this as well, you would think that you would feel very small. You would think that you would
Mhm.
feel very like
Mm.
powerless in those moments.
Yes.
And what has been my experience, and I'm curious what the psychology says about this.
Yeah.
What I have found in those moments is that in allowing myself to be vulnerable and to say sorry, the
Mhm.
child respects me even more. Like the
Mhm.
child is then more willing to open up to me and
Yes.
listen to my recommendations because they see that
Mhm.
I truly am trying to make that connection and listen to them.
Absolutely. I love everything you're saying, and I wanna address it 2 ways. One, the impact on you as a parent doing that, and also the impact on the child when you do that. So, this is actually the topic of my PhD was in school bullying interventions, but it was looking at kids who are bullied, the impact of them forgiving. And it's the same piece. Sometimes we think of forgiveness as like being a doormat, letting people get away with it, that kind of thing. In the same way that we think if we're admitting a mistake, that's like me putting myself down. But actually, the courage it takes to notice what's happened, to face that feeling, and then to label where the accountability lies. Yeah, the accountability lies with me in this instance, or sometimes when we're talking about those bullying things, the accountability might lie with someone else, but really to see the situation the way it is, and then to be vulnerable with your feelings around that. This is what happened. That is a true form of power. That is because it's almost when we think of power dynamics, we often think of power in relation to other people. So it's like, do I have power over you? And when we're shutting people down or when we're holding things in, that's an attempt to have power over someone. But when we are speaking vulnerably and honestly in our truth, that is a power that transcends everything else. It has nothing to do with anyone else around us. It is a power that just originates in us, and then we just are empowered. It doesn't matter what anyone else says or does. And that's the beautiful thing. And that's what we don't realize until we do it. That, oh, now it doesn't matter how my child is reacting or not reacting because I am being honest and truthful. I am being real. And that makes me very grounded. That makes me very clear about what I want to do next. And now I'm not as reactive anymore. It's an incredibly empowering experience. And that goes for anything. It's why also with all forms of mental health as a parent, if you can own it, again, not by dumping, but by saying vulnerably, hey, this is what I feel, this is what I've been through, all of a sudden it's not holding you captive anymore. It's not this shameful shadow that you're carrying around. It's, oh, hey, yeah, I said it. Now it doesn't matter if other people know that about me or if they make fun of me about that or whatever, because, I own it. It's the same thing we say if our child is being picked on. Well, okay, let's own the things that are us. And then it doesn't bother us when people say things about us about that because we know that. I know that about myself and I'm not worried about it. So why should you be? That kind of thing. So that's empowering. And then for your child, this is so important because kids can feel everything. They can sense everything. And when they sense that something's not okay, which is what they would do when we react in ways that are not helpful, they can tell that's happening. And if we don't own that and acknowledge it, they stop trusting themselves because they've picked up on something and then it seems like no one else is talking about it. And then they start going, maybe I was wrong. Maybe that wasn't an okay thing to do. And then they get this confusion within themselves of what is right and what is wrong, what is okay, what is not okay. And that is the most challenging experience because if we can't trust ourselves, how do we navigate through complicated situations? So by you being courageous and brave and saying, this is what happened. I reacted this way because I was feeling like this. That's not a way I would like to react. That validates what they picked up on already. And that's when they get that sense of groundedness in themselves. Oh, okay, the world is the way I perceive it to be. Then they can move on. And they're not caught up in that worry of, am I right? Am I wrong? What is okay? What is not okay? So you are giving them the most incredible gift, the gift of truth. Truth is always the right answer, I would say, in parenting. Yes, we can couch things in language that is appropriate for kids of different ages, but saying things that are truthful is always going to benefit kids because they feel everything. They know it anyway. And so if you give a name to it, it helps them understand what they're thinking and feeling.
I love the relating it back to experience that they're having with other things outside the home that we can't control.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it be bullying or one of my children has a friend who is constantly emotionally dumping and then that triggers them, right? Like, or maybe their education, the actual scholarly part of it, isn't going the way that they want it to go. There's power in, as you're saying, this idea of like the response to my child when they bring these things to my attention. I've had to learn to be like, gosh, that sucks. I'm
Yes.
sorry. Like, and just sitting with that because my instinct is a fixer.
Yes.
It's like,
Yes.
Mama bear, who do I need to go tear down the door of, whatever, right? But I have found in asking the question, I had to learn to do this for a while. Every single time a child would come to me and be like, do you want me to listen or do you want me to fix it? And 9 times out of 10, I was shocked. They're like, they just want you to listen.
Love it.
And
Yeah.
they want to feel heard. So maybe we can talk a little bit about like, what are some of these other things, especially as we're preparing to go back to school, that we might be experiencing, whether it's as parents or as educators, that these children are going to be challenged by one way or another, whether it's bullying. My youngest is going into high school. He has autism. He has severe ADHD. He has braces, right? Like he has all these things that he both has been, but also feels bullied by because part of the story that he's telling himself is,
yes,
people are making fun of me, even if they're like, I've witnessed it with his brothers, right? Like they're being jovial, they're being playful. but
Yeah.
it feels like an attack all the time, right? So as
Yes.
children face some of these challenges, how can we prepare to support them in the best way that we can?
Absolutely. Great question. So again, it's that piece of control what you can control and let go of the rest. And so the only thing we can do is create an environment where they can speak to us openly, as we talked about before, and also give them a skill set. So they will face peer challenges are one of the hardest things. Peers are unkind. It's again, because everybody's just working their stuff out at that age. And so helping to teach them that, having open conversations about it. And this is one of the things that's so important that I always try to reinforce for educators, for parents, talk about it. The more you talk about it, the more it gets normalized. So talk about why people act in cruel ways. Why are they doing that? It's never about us. It's because they're feeling insecure or they're feeling overwhelmed, and it's a way for them to let that feeling out, and they don't have the skill set of what to do about it. So it's like providing your child with this coat of armor, basically, of how do I understand when something's coming at me, how to deflect it mentally by shifting those thoughts, how to recognize what are the thoughts I'm thinking. So what you said was perfect about your son. This is what we all do. Yes, there's the action that comes at us. Something hard happens. Yes, a test is really hard. Someone's cruel to us. Things don't go the way we want. That is the situation. But then we add this layer of suffering to it because of our script, the storyline that we tell ourselves, our thought. And noticing our thoughts is actually a hugely complex skill, and it's really challenging, especially when we're young, but every kid can learn this. So just simply breaking it down when you're talking to them. So first step is, gosh, let's hear about this. I want to hear what happened and validate their feeling. And then, okay, so what is your thought about it? How are you interpreting that? Are you telling yourself that this is your fault? And again, normalize that. That's what we all do. So it's hard for a child to own up to that unless we say, I do that all the time. Whenever, even to this day, when someone says something unkind to me, I always think it's my fault. That's the first place my brain goes. So that's okay, as long as we can see it. So help them break down every hard situation they go through. They need to be able to process it. They need to be able to go, okay, so I felt this way about it. Then I started thinking, I hate that person forever, or I'm a problem, or I need to change. And then how do we start acting? So it's just really breaking down the feeling, thought, behavior change. How did this all go? Then did I go to the bathroom and cry? Then did I yell at them? Then did I try to be friends with someone else to make them feel bad? What did I do in that situation because I was in pain? And then it's okay, forgive ourselves for that. Now, what would I like to change next time? And this is so important because we can heal our traumas retroactively. We can, if we think about the situation again and we really go, okay, if I was in that situation again and they said that to me, here's the thought I wish I would have thought. Oh, this is not about me. This is about them. I'm okay with who I am. I look for evidence of why what they're saying is not true. I know I have people that care about me, whatever it is, help them find a new thought. And then what is the action I wish I did? Well, maybe I wish I walked away. Maybe I wish I said to them, hey, stop. That's not a kind thing to say. And then we have a template, we have a script. And so now, because the thing with trauma and why it has this ripple effect is that when we experience something, whatever we did will just repeat again the next time, unless we give a different option. So then our brain all of a sudden has two options. And if we keep doing that again and again, we might not be able to make that choice right away, but eventually we can start to make that choice and we can start to have that new pathway. So it's just like any other skill, just doing it repeatedly over and over again, giving ourselves a lot of room for error and validating your child saying, it's okay. Let's just see what we wish we would have done. Let's think about that a little bit. Let's try next time. Let's see if we can get one tiny step further next time. Let's keep talking about it, keep coaching. Like if your child was in a sport, you wouldn't expect them to be amazing at it right away, but you practice over and over again. That's exactly the thing that we want to approach these types of situations with. It's a skill set. There's no shame in it. The more we work at it, the more we can figure these things out. And then we celebrate the little wins. Oh, it didn't hurt quite so much when they said it this time. Amazing. Or, oh, you know what? I was able to walk away after a few minutes. Amazing. Like this is the skill set. So it's not about the other person. And this is important about empowerment too. The empowering thing we can do is work on ourselves. That's the most empowering thing, because every time we keep thinking about that person, what they did, that's giving our power away, because we're saying they have the power to make us feel small. If you work on yourself, you're bringing that power right back. It has nothing to do with that person. They said it's done. Now, what am I going to do about it? That's my power.
I love the way that you described neural pathways, which is a very like weird word that I didn't understand until I understood it. And then I was like, oh, it's so clear. I love this concept. But the idea that if your brain has two choices, it's two paths. And the more that you take the other path, the more your brain will want to go down that path. I've described it before as being like the Grand Canyon. And the thing to consider is that for those of us that are adults that went down the other path because we didn't have someone to coach or to guide us into changing our responses, and we internalized or we externalized instead of letting go of some of these things that really had nothing to do with us, we carved like a Grand Canyon of the same feeling over and over again. And then now that we're adults talking to our therapist or trying to process life, it's so much harder to not just naturally go into that very deep groove. And so the idea of having a casual but very important way to build the skill for our children so that they have multiple pathways of healthy options will improve their health outcome, their mental well-being, their relationships with others, their job prospects, like so many things
100%.
in life when they have these skills. Okay, so let's play a game, because I think the challenge that a lot of us have is that our children will come to us and they'll say something that totally catches us off guard. I cannot be the only one that are constantly blindsided by. I think that this is an intentional tactic on their part, that if they're being vulnerable and something feels scary, they're going to do it in a way where they can just like throw it over the fence and run, right? They just lob this flaming bag of dog poo at you and I'm out. Okay, so I'm going to say things that my children have said to me or others, and I would love to hear how you would respond.
Oh my gosh, good. Love it.
Okay. I feel ugly. I feel fat. I feel unappreciated. I feel overwhelmed, like your children say. I feel meh.
Great. So my response would be, that is a really hard feeling. I really get that feeling. I have also felt that way before. Tell me more about what's causing that feeling. Talk to me about that. What's going on for you right now?
Love it. Okay, next. I'm going to say, insert a statement that is not correct. For example, Helen Keller wasn't real.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Okay. Again, tell me more about that. What is your thinking there? Tell me more about your thought process. What would they say to that? Would they have a thought process, or would they just?
No, they would tell you that they watched a TikTok.
Okay. Right. Great. This is actually a really important skill set, because we live in a world where information is coming just in whoever said something, I'm going to believe it. So the skill set would be, if you can believe anything you want, you have that. So it's really important we don't shut kids down. You can absolutely believe anything you want. My recommendation would be that you choose your sources, but you do your own research. Don't believe anything anyone else says ever. You are the only one that's going to know what's true for you. And we want to always know that we can be proved wrong. This is a really important thing. If new information comes to us, we have to be able to say, oh, I was wrong about that. So if that's what you want to believe, absolutely fine. I would encourage you to look for your own evidence and make your own decision about it. And if you do that, and you have your own evidence and that's what you want to believe, then I support you. But if you're just listening to what someone else said, then it's really important to look at, why are you wanting to do that? Why aren't you wanting to trust yourself? Why are you wanting to trust someone that's probably a stranger? That's how I would approach that.
Yeah, it's more eloquent than I think our initial response to the table was.
Which is probably in the moment what I would have said. This is the repair. We're just going to assume that I've had a terrible reaction first. And this is when I come back and go, wait a minute.
And I would add, providing some of those sources was super helpful in this instance. I actually did do the repair. We came back the next day.
Yeah.
and brought some like, here are some alternative versions of
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
information.
Great.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. People are making fun of me at school.
Mhm. The first response would be, I am so sorry to hear that. That is really hard to go through. Tell me more about the experience. What I'm most interested in is how it feels for you. So sometimes when we go through something, we just want to talk about the story. And the story is important, what happened. But I want to spend as little amount of time on what happened and as much amount of time on what their experience of it was. Because otherwise it can be, and then they said this, and then this happened. So I think it's just, okay, what did that feel like for you? What did they say? Maybe is a little piece of it, but tell me about your feelings around it. I would really explore their feelings around it. What did it feel like? Why do you think it felt like that for you? I think why is a really important question because it's like, oh, wait a minute. I don't have to feel sad about that. I don't have to feel low about that. So they said that, helping them really explore why they're feeling that way, what their thoughts might be. Are you thinking now that it's true what they said? What are you thinking? All of those things. And then what's something you can do to help yourself in this moment? So really taking them down that thought, feeling, action chain. Then flipping back and saying, why do you think they might have said that? And really helping them get curious about, because it's so like the first reaction, probably depending on how young the child is, to go, oh, they're saying that because they don't like me, or they're saying that because whatever it is, it's their assumption. Go, well, let's dive into that a little bit further. And even what I love doing with kids is helping them recognize when they've been unkind to someone. So often it's with their siblings, not with their friends. So have you ever said something to a sibling or to someone that was not that nice? And they go, oh, yeah. And what were you feeling? Well, I was feeling sad because they took something of mine or whatever it is. And so you go, okay, so now let's apply that logic to this situation. If they said something unkind, they were probably feeling something themselves. And as soon as they can perspective take like that, a light bulb often goes off and they go, oh, this is not because they don't like me or because there's something wrong with me. This is going on with them. So those are the two parts, but I'd always start with their feelings and experiences and validate that and empower them in those ways. And what can you do? And then I would circle back and say, okay, whatever their action plan is, I'm going to say something to that friend about what they said, or I'm going to not sit with them at lunch or whatever it is that's a boundary for them. Then check in with them the next day. How did that go? Did you try that strategy? And keep that dialogue going. Great, you tried it. Or no, they said something mean again. Oh, that's really hard. Start the process over again. So really making sure that you keep bringing it up, because they might not. They might bring it up once and then they might still feel ashamed to bring it up a second time. So once they've brought it up, you keep bringing it up until they go, I don't want to talk about that anymore. It's not happening. You go, oh. But you keep that exploration. Let's explore this skill that we're now learning.
I love that. I would also add that if when when you keep bringing it back around, if it doesn't seem to be improving, and
Yeah.
in my experience, like, it does seem to be like actual bullying and not
Yeah.
just teenagers being
Mm-hmm.
teenagers at the lunch table,
Mm-hmm.
to be the advocate for your child, because we
100%.
are still parents, and
Mm-hmm.
getting the school system involved in a calm way. But
Yes.
being able, I will say in my personal experience, being able to go to the school system and say, hey, I've been working with my child on this for
Mm-hmm.
a week, and it seems like this is an ongoing issue.
Yeah.
Here are some of the instances that he shared with me.
Yeah.
Can you please look into this? They're so grateful for that, versus probably what
Yeah.
they get often is like, my child's being bullied, do something about it, right?
100%. Yes. Being the advocate and being willing to work with them and being willing to engage and saying, can I just have some assistance in this? Absolutely. That's definitely bringing the teacher in, bringing maybe the other child in, maybe the other child's parent, but in that calm way of, we're all just doing our best here and we're all just trying to figure out a way forward. It's absolutely vital. And just always remembering, this is the hardest part about being a parent, is you can't control what that other child does. And oftentimes teachers can't see all of these things that are happening, which is just so challenging. So we want to be the advocate. We want everyone to know. We want to do as much intervention as we can. And we want to keep letting that child know that they have the power. Let's figure out what can help them stay safe, even if it doesn't change. So do everything we can to change it. And if it doesn't change, what's our backup plan? Because if things go on, do we need to move classes? Do we need to figure out another option? There's always a way to work around it, but always remembering that to help your child recognize if this keeps happening, you can leave and call me or whatever it is. So that piece where they know that even if it doesn't change. And then that advocacy piece is so, so important.
All right. One that is really big for me is not having my children feel anxiety. A lot of anxiety in our family
Mm-hmm.
and pressure that we put on ourselves. I don't know where they get this from. To be successful or to whatever that definition is. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say your child comes to you and says something like, I suck. I'm a failure. I got a bad
Yeah.
grade.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I would say that's a really hard feeling because that's a feeling. That's a hard thought. That's a hard feeling. I know what that feels like. Again, I would say I get that. I know that feeling and that feeling sucks. Again, same answer here. Tell me more about that. Why? Where is that feeling coming from? And then you can explore, is there evidence that supports that? So coming back to the evidence, are you feeling that way because one thing happened? Now let's look at all of the other things that are happening. So helping them zoom out a little bit and go, first of all, and I think this is an important part. First, just letting them know that a hard feeling, it's okay to feel that way. So we don't want to, again, it's a fix it thing. Sometimes when we're doing thought challenging, that can be the fix it version. So yes, that's really hard. Now let's examine that. So you feel like a failure because you got a bad grade. Do you have a bad grade in every subject? Have you gotten bad grades before? What are your study habits like? Okay, let's look at the whole picture. Wow, you have all of these wins and then you have this one failure. What does failure mean? This is a really important discussion. What does failure mean? Does that mean I'm bad or does that mean I'm learning and growing? Because it's that perspective of we need to fail. When we fail, that's usually when we learn the most. It's not about being perfect. Let's learn and grow from that experience. And that's really hard because we do live in a world of perfectionists and we're all stressed and we're all trying to do the right thing. So it's that coaching and guidance around let's zoom out and then let's look at letting ourselves feel that way because it's hard. And then what can I learn from this situation? And I think no matter whether we have a success or a failure, whatever's happening, if we approach it as I want to take the most learning I possibly can from this situation, then we're always winning. And I think that's the sort of coaching and guidance that we want to give, that it's okay to feel that way, but let's not let that feeling then turn into a story for ourselves. Let's just sit with the feeling and see what we want to learn from it. Because also sometimes when we feel things like regret and we feel things like even shame, that's actually a helpful emotion because it's telling us that maybe we did something that's not so great. And I think this is something we're so focused on feeling good and our kids feeling good all the time. We forget that if they don't feel that sadness and sorrow that comes because they didn't study hard enough and they got a bad grade in a test, they're not going to change their, actions. So we want them to be able to feel that heaviness and that sorrow when something's not going their way, because then we go, okay, what do we think we can do differently? And that's an important learning process. And if we take that away by trying to make them feel happy, then where's their conscience going to come from? Where are they going to develop that sense of what's okay and what's not okay and what's the right decision for them? What's going to lead them to feeling fulfilled and joyful versus lead them to feeling unfulfilled and ashamed or whatever it is.
I love the way that you just described that. Brene Brown defined it as resilience in Alice of the Heart, and it really stuck with me because she talked about how, as a parent, our desire is to fix things for our children and to take things away and make them better, but that doesn't empower and teach them how to do those things for themselves. And when they become adults and we're not around, we want them to be able to do that. And I think your explanation of like, if we take that feeling away, then the child's not going to learn, oh, maybe I should study more and then I'll get a better grade, right? But we don't want our children to feel like a failure. We want them to learn their lesson and feel empowered by it and then go on to do the thing that helps them feel empowered, positive, whatever it is. But that definition of resilience has just really stuck with me for a really long time and applied in many times of my life. So
definitely. And I think the thing to remember, is this a feeling that's enduring or is this a fleeting feeling? Because feelings come and go. And so that's a really important thing to remember as a parent. yes, I don't want my child to feel like a failure all the time, but it's okay if they feel like a failure in this moment. And that's, again, taking that pressure off. I haven't done the wrong thing. My child is not going to suffer forever just because they're feeling it this once. And that's that difference of zooming out and going, okay, do they feel this way every day? Or are they just feeling this way right now? And if it's just right now, then great, this is a learning experience, which is hard because you never want your child to suffer. But it's that space of going, okay, let me just notice, is this becoming a pattern? Is it becoming a pattern? Then we want to step in more and do more coaching and more guidance. But if it's momentary, sometimes all we can do, like you said before, is listen. That's really hard. I'm so sorry. Sometimes that's all they need. And then the feeling passes, they figure out what they want to do about it, and that's it. So it's that balance of, is this a right now thing or is this an enduring thing?
Okay, the last one. And if you recall, listeners, we started this by saying things that your kids are going to say to you that catch you off guard. And so I'm going to end the last one with skibbity toilet riz. And I'm going to answer the question myself by saying, your teenagers especially, but I'm sure it's elementary school aged kids and up, are going to say the most random, weird things, especially if they have the internet. I suggest following people on social media who can educate you, knowing that you're the parent that needs to learn these things, because for a while I tried to keep up, and you just reach a point where you're like, you know what? I admit I'm too old for this. I'm a 4-month-old. You don't get it. It was actually interesting as I have friends who have younger children. They're like, Stacy, you're cooler than I am. You know the cool stuff. And I'm like, no, I don't know it. I learned it in order to be a parent of teenagers and not have them tell me, okay, Karen, and me think like that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
So I'll put a link in the show notes of at
Right.
least one, but I actually have a few that I recommend. And I think that
Perfect.
following people like you, following people like Lisa DeMore, who talk about this kind
Mhm.
of thing with teenagers a lot online, and
Mhm.
also educators who are teaching parents what
Mhm.
kids are into and where it comes from and what it might
Yeah.
mean and how you can interact with it. Because
Mhm.
the coolest thing I can do as a parent is if my kid says something like that and then I know what it means and I clap back. Like, creates a really cool dynamic, but also like they're not going to try to pull one over on me anymore, right?
Yes, absolutely. Love it.
Right. I like to always leave listeners with something that they can take away with that feels positive and actionable. They can take to either be of service for themselves or for others. I know we just talked through a ton of ideas and different things. And what I try to do is like, if someone's hearing all of this and they're thinking through all the times that they said or did the wrong thing, or they're
Mhm.
feeling like, gosh, I don't even know where to start with this. This is so different than how I'm currently
Mhm.
talking to my children or how I was raised. Maybe they have younger children and they're like, I don't even know what to
Mhm.
do.
Mhm.
Where would you suggest they start in a way that feels like they can turn off the show and they can do this thing and they can feel good about that instead of all the
Mhm.
overwhelm and all the things that they want to change? Because we can't
Love
do all
it.
things all at
No,
once.
absolutely. So the one thing I would say, 2 parts to it. Notice what's happening. Notice what you're doing, notice what your kids are doing, just notice. That's the only thing you wanna walk away from this from, is to stop and go, "Why am I acting this way? Why are they acting this way? What just happened?" So just notice and then forgive yourself. That's it. Those 2 things. Notice a pattern, notice that you said something that you didn't like or you said something you did like, and then immediately you'll feel a sense of shame when you start noticing anything. So immediately forgive yourself, and that's it. That's all you need to do. If you focus on paying attention and noticing why certain things are happening, what you're saying, what you're doing, what your child is doing, what the dynamic is like, just noticing it sometimes can be incredibly painful because we will notice things that we don't like, but notice and forgive. And if you can do that, you will find that a lot of the things that are problems will often honestly just melt away. As soon as we bring attention to things, oftentimes they get less intense. Like that parent, we want to send that parent so much love that was in the park screaming at her child. We've all been there multiple times a day, probably in various ways. But look, she noticed and she forgave herself enough to be able to be present in the moment. And that's probably why she was able to remember, oh, right, I remember now what I want to do differently here. But what she did first was notice, I'm caught in something, forgave herself to come back to the moment. And then you will know what the right thing to do is. Trust yourself. You know all of the things that your child needs. It's just if we can see what's happening, forgive ourselves to get out of the way of it, then the right action will come forth from us.
Love that. Dr. Hayley Watson, can you remind our listeners where they can follow up with you, follow you, find more information, all the things?
Absolutely. So openparachuteschools.com is the website where we have our school programs. Also, my book for educators and also for parents is on there. And then on LinkedIn, that's the platform I use the most. I have other social media platforms and I should be using them more, but I haven't been. So LinkedIn is the place. Dr. Hayley Watson on LinkedIn. Love to interact and connect with any of you.
Wonderful. Listeners, thank you for tuning in today. If you've enjoyed the show, I would love if you could leave a review. I'm going to say it again, like actually listen. Just it's not just like the thing that all YouTubers say. It really genuinely makes a difference in our ability to continue to do this show and to help other people find resources. And it costs you nothing except a little bit of your time. And really appreciate you making that effort. And don't forget to follow or subscribe in whatever podcast app you're using. As always, we appreciate your willingness to be open to growth for your own personal changes. No one is perfect, but in listening, learning, and unlearning, we can choose to become better versions of ourselves for ourselves. Thank you, Dr. Hayley. Anything else you want to mention to listeners before we part ways?
No, I think that covers it. Just thank you so much for hosting this show and doing this. I think it's so incredibly important. And for everyone that's listening, thank you for even listening, for even wanting to do any of this stuff. The more each of us works on ourselves, the better world we have. So just the act of having listened and having participated in these kinds of conversations is amazing. You're doing great things for the world just by being a part of this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And listeners, we'll be back again next week.